Well, before today's Roshi's talk in the afternoon, my understanding of this particular event was that Mary Ellen and I were to speak about koans, but I'm not sure if that still sticks. But I did prepare, at least I found a koan that I wanted to look at. And I presume everybody's familiar with koans here. Is there anybody who doesn't know anything about it? No, you're all old timers. So this koan is case 20 from the Shoyo Roku, which is a collection that's translated the title as the Book of Equanimity or the Book of Serenity. So it's not one that we use for most of the Kanzeon koans, although we encounter them, but not as being from this book. So this one, case 20, is called Jizo's Not Knowing is Most Intimate. Main case, attention. Jizo asked Hogen, "Venerable monk, where are you going?" "I'm wandering on pilgrimage," replied Hogen. "What is the meaning of your pilgrimage?" asked Jizo. "I don't know," replied Hogen. "Not knowing is most intimate," said Jizo. At that, Hogen experienced great enlightenment. The verse, and the verse usually is part of the koan. Right now, having studied to the full, it's the same as before. Having shed entirely the minutest obstacles, one comes to not know. Short's short, long's long. Stop cutting and pasting. According with high, according with low, each is even and content. A family's abundance or thrift is used freely according to circumstance. Roaming serenely in the land, one's feet go where they will. The purpose of 30 years pilgrimage, a clear transgression against one's pair of eyebrows. I think the text is clear and the poem text is clear, but I'll just mention the last line, a clear transgression against one's pair of eyebrows. That's a kind of a saying that comes up in various koans where a teacher or a student talks about losing your eyebrows. And the point of that is that when you lose your eyebrows, it's a sign that you're teaching the false dharma. So the purpose of 30 years pilgrimage, a clear transgression against one's pair of eyebrows. You can take that as you will. So to me, the key to this koan is very simple. I mean, the essence of it has to do with this phrase, not knowing is most intimate. And it's come up today, came up several times in Roshi's Teisho. And what's striking is the use of the word intimate, which I'm sure is a modern word for this old text, and saying that not knowing is most intimate. So what is not knowing? It is most intimate. What is most intimate? Not knowing. That's what this koan is saying. The rest is application. So Jizo is the teacher. That's the Japanese version of his name. And Hogen is at this point, the student. He's the one who's being addressed as venerable monk. And when I first read this koan, and I've known about it for some time, I assumed that, rather carelessly, that Hogen was this kind of young guy who was kind of wandering around and hadn't sort of figured much out. And he encounters this wise old teacher, and the teacher straightens him out. But I did a little bit of reading about Hogen, and just out of curiosity. And it turns out that Hogen is, his Chinese name is Fayan, F-A-Y-A-N. And Fayan was a very distinguished and important master himself. And when this event occurred, he had already been a longtime student of Buddhism and Confucianism, was a very established and respected scholar. So he was no wandering child. And he also, if you know the name Fayan, he was the founder of one of the 5 early schools of Buddhism, so of Zen Buddhism. So he's a very significant character. And it's interesting that he's seen in this light, and that we might assume that he was a very inexperienced student and monk, but he was very experienced. And in fact, I ran across an interesting version of this story that I find amusing, and I think tells us something extra about this encounter. Fayan, or Hogen, it seems, was ordained, or at least became a novice at the age of 6 or 7. So at this point, he's a grown man, and he's had this whole experience as a scholar and as a practitioner. And the story goes that he was, after establishing himself in this way as a reputable teacher, he became more interested in Zen. And he kind of dropped everything and decided to go on pilgrimage. And pilgrimage in traditional Zen stories, as you probably know, is even a kind of organized time for monks to go out and encounter other teachers than the ones they're studying. Leave the monastery and spend a season, usually summer or winter, pilgrimaging from temple to temple, and testing teachers and being tested by teachers, and deepening their understanding and having a broader experience of the practice. So what's happening before this story is told in the Shoyoroku is that he had decided he was going to study Zen and find a teacher. And he was on his way to the kind of more established area of great temples and famous teachers. And he had with him 3 other monks who were also experienced, as far as I could tell. And they were traveling together, and they got caught in a snowstorm. And they found this out-of-the-way temple to spend the night in, and they were welcomed by the priest and the teacher, whose name here is Jizo. He's also known as Wen Yi. No, not Wen Yi, Daizang. So in fact, there's another name of this koan if you run across it, and it's an interesting variation on the title. And these koans are all, how they're translated and through whose eyes they're seen and read is always interesting and questionable. So the other title for this koan is Daizang's kindness. So it's the teacher's kindness to Hogen, to Fayan, that is one way of looking at this koan. And here's the story. Let's see, so Fayan's name is also Wen Yi. It's hard to keep track of all these guys with all their different names, but as Wen Yi, or Fayan, or Hogen, and his companions were ready to travel on. So they'd spent the night at this Jizo's temple, or Master Daizang's temple. So Master Daizang accompanied them to the gate. Addressing Hogen, the master said, "I've heard you say several times that the 3 realms are only mind, and the myriad phenomena are only consciousness." And this is in fact what the Fayan school is about, mind-only consciousness. So even this teacher in the remote place knew this guy is, he's heard of his teachings, but he's coming as a monk to be instructed or to encounter the teacher. So the master, Daizang, then pointed to a large rock by the gate. And this is about, they're about to leave, these four monks with Hogen. So the master points to this large rock and he says, so is this rock inside or outside your mind? Because you say everything is mind only. And when he said, inside, he's got an answer right away. And the master says to him, it's going to be a difficult journey carrying such a large rock around in your head. The master then asked him, Venerable, where is it you are going? So this is the koan that we hear. And when Yi Fayan says, I'm wandering on pilgrimage, what is the meaning of pilgrimage? When Yi said, I don't know. The master said, not knowing is most intimate. With these words, Wen Yi had a deep realization. He decided to stay longer at the temple and study with Master Daizong. So his trip is cut short and now he's staying in this temple. And I found another kind of postscript to this, which I think is very interesting. Every day, this is after Fayan has, Hogen Fayan has decided to study with this master. Every day, he presented his new views and new reasons to the master. In other words, he was doing koans and he was being rejected. And so for all his great study and all his profound knowledge, the master just said, no, no. All the master commented was, the Buddha Dharma is not like that. At the end of a month, Fayan Hogen said to the master, I have exhausted my stock of words and reason. The master said, as regards the Buddha Dharma, everything is a present reality. At the hearing of these words, Hogen was greatly enlightened. So this is interesting. We have the koan where he's greatly enlightened at the end, and then we find out his great enlightenment led him to study more with this teacher. He was that kind of sincere person, an honest person. And then he got this second opening, enlightenment. So it's impressive that after what we would think, well, that's the end. You know, he had great enlightenment. No, again, is studying. And again, something happens, something very profound. So, but it's the same theme, that intimacy is, that not knowing is most intimate. So, how to understand this? I mean, we've talked about it today. I talked about it with several people because it's been on my mind during Daishan. And I think this is something that Roshi has been talking about over the past few weeks and months. And he brought it up, I'm sure, in a class and in conversation that I have had with him various times, this idea of not knowing is most intimate. So intimate with what? And what are we talking about when we're talking about intimacy? I mean, several of us, have been talking about that, and today it was discussed beautifully by several people. So there's intimacy, we could say, in the relative realm between people. Between lovers, between husband and wife, between mother and child, between a human and a dog or a cat sometimes. And so there's that, you could say, relative intimacy, but that is a beautiful and profound part of our lives. And I know there was some discussion or whatever, it came up, well, is that like a lesser intimacy? And is this intimacy that is being expressed or suggested as most intimate, as not knowing is most intimate, is that in some kind of way a lesser intimacy? I think they're inseparable, actually. I think without the intimacy that is not knowing, which is, I would call it, and Roshi has called it, I think, in one way or another, intimacy with our own life, our own experience, not with another, not with a beloved, not with a other reality, but within our lives. And I think for me, this not knowing is inseparable from the intimacy that we think of in a relative way. And without not knowing as a foundation, I think even intimacy in the relative sphere is incomplete. In other words, if we're not intimate with our lives, our own lives, can we really be intimate with another person? And so that's what this koan is asking us to look at, I think, this intimacy, however you want to define it. And you could say that the relative intimacy between lovers or between deep friends or parents and children, or even in a moment with another person. It can be, and we've probably all had the experience of some kind of deep connection in a moment with a person, usually in some kind of crisis. That's been my experience. Or in a sangha, that can be the intimacy of a sesshin, really. Whatever our differences are, there is this possibility for intimacy. And especially in this setting as a sesshin, to experience and explore and recognize the intimacy of not knowing is a perfect occasion. So what is it to be intimate with one's own life, with one's being? I guess what I was talking about this afternoon and what happened for me when I was fortunate enough to spend that time with Genpo Roshi a couple of weeks ago was that I realized that despite my study and experience with Zen, that I still had this feeling, as you all know, and as you all experience, of something, that there was something I was still seeking. You know? And another way of saying that, as I've heard from several people just even this afternoon, is this feeling that something is not as we might wish it to be in our life. And when is that not true for all of us? It's always true. And yet, what's going on, in my opinion, when we have that feeling that something is not right, that we're not good enough, that something is lacking in our life, or that the world as it appears to us is intolerable in some way, is that, of course, we're wishing for things to be other than what they are. And it also means that we're not in our life, not one with our life, from moment to moment. In those moments when we feel that way, we're somewhere else. We wish to be somewhere else. We wish something were other. We wish that the world was different. We wish that we had done something different, or that we will be able to do something different, but we are not in the present. And that's all this is about. One way of looking at it. Being intimate with one's life is being in the present. And what does that take? That's what this koan is about. Not knowing is most intimate. When we can, at least momentarily, depart from our normal, or at least my normal frame of mind, which is things aren't the way I want them to be, and we give up that notion and we give up being in the future or the past or somewhere other than where we are at this moment, that is when we are not intimate with our life. That is going on because we want to know. We want to know, how can we change things? How can things be better? What's wrong with this or what's wrong with that? But that's all taking us out of the present moment. So the experience that I described, which seems absurd and kind of trivial, realizing that even when I'm holding up a cup of coffee, I'm still kind of thinking there's something else going on. That's all there is going on. And in a way, that's a huge disappointment, but only from the perspective of it could be some other way. But when we're willing to say, this is the only way it can be, what is, then we are able to do what? Appreciate it. We are able to be in the moment. And until then, we're not, because we want to know. We want to know what's going to happen. We want to know how we can change things. We know how we can bring things the way we want them to be and under control. To give up that control, to give up that expectation, to give up that hope is hard. It's a bitter pill to swallow. And yet, it's the way to live one's life without any obstacles to being in the present. So this strikes me in the poem. This is the beginning of this verse. Right now, having studied to the full, it's the same as before. So that cup of coffee is still just a cup of coffee. So it's the same as before, but it's not. And even after having studied to the full, in my case, all these years, it's just the same as before. It's still just a cup of coffee, but it's a different cup of coffee because I'm not thinking that there's any other cup of coffee to drink. Having shed entirely the minutest obstacles, one comes to not know. So how do we get to not know? Shed the minutest obstacles. And the minutest obstacles are as minute as, gee, this coffee tasted better yesterday, or I wish I could have gotten a better cup of coffee today. That's a minute obstacle, and that is what we have to shed. So it's a subtle thing that we habitually and inevitably, and there's nothing wrong with it, but that's the way we think all the time. So how to shed the minutest obstacle? And I love the word shed, and I brought it up a couple of 100 times. And it's a word that I think is very expressive of this how to be in the present. I mean, we hear over and over again, letting go. Let go of whatever idea you might have, of whatever expectation, even whatever hope or wish you might have. And then you're in the present moment, right now. And the shed is a word that I learned from studying Dogen with my former teacher, who was a scholar of Dogen. And as many of you know, Dogen's profound enlightenment, which occurred when he was still a young man, he traveled all the way to China at great hardship. And he finally met his master, the man he chose to be his master, who one night in the Zendo came in late at night and started berating the monks and hit one of them with a slipper. Wake up, you should be paying attention, you should be practicing, you should be meditating, you should be all these things you're supposed to be because you're a monk and you're sleeping. And so he says, Zen is all about, I'm not getting the words right, somebody must know them better, but the point of Zen, drop off body mind. So that's another expression of letting go. And so to get back to this word, at that point, Dogen had great enlightenment. Just when he was drop off body mind. Of course, it was in Chinese, who knows what he said. And that's the way it's translated. And it sounds like another one of these insuperable obstacles that Zen places in our way. You know, kill yourself on your cushion. Yeah, it's simple. You know, you want to get to the bottom of things, die. You know, but the teacher said, drop off body mind. And when Dogen had that experience, he went to his teacher. I forget his name. Anybody remember? Whatever. So he goes to the teacher late at night for Doksan, or actually Sanzen is the word they used, and comes into the room, and the teacher sees something has happened. And that's, you know, not a normal thing to do, to just kind of march in like that in the middle of the night. And he respectfully says to Dogen, in so many words, what happened? What's different? And Dogen said, shedding, shedding. That's what he said. That was what his experience was. And that, I think, is a beautiful expression of letting go. Partly because it's not so extreme, and also importantly, because it's a continuing process. Continue, shedding, shedding. He didn't say, I shed my body and mind. He didn't say, I'm done. He said, shedding. That's me right now, shedding, shedding. So when I was looking at the various texts, actually, I kind of took the liberty of combining different versions of this koan to make it work for me. And so that's why I put in, having shed entirely the minutest obstacles, one comes to not know. So that's a how, that's a hint. And the idea that there's something other than that to do, or that there's something else that will happen after that, or has to happen before, is the trap that we are always making for ourselves. When I do this, when I pass the koan, when I live long enough, when I get enlightenment, when I'm this, when I'm that. But this is a continuous process. And what's beautiful about the story, the way I have seen it of Hogen, is yes, he had great enlightenment in the first example, but then he stays for a month with his teacher, and again, he has another opening, another clearer, deeper appreciation of the moment. It's not more than that. And if we think it's more than that, that's the trap we create for ourselves. That's what I realized in Hawaii when I was thinking that that there's something more. You know, we all know the koan about Ananda and Mahakashapa. You know, Mahakashapa has been designated as the successor of the Buddha, who's Ananda's uncle. And Ananda is this very long-time student and loved by the Buddha, and has this remarkable memory which has preserved all of the sayings and the teachings and the sutras of his master, Shakyamuni Buddha. And Ananda, out of what seems to me like desperation, says to Mahakashapa, you know, when the Buddha passed on to you the bowl and the robe, which that was the incident with the twirling of the flower, and it was just a smile, that was it. And Buddha said, you got it. And so Ananda, and this is like years after his master, his uncle, his beloved teacher has died, and he's still trying to figure out, what was that? What did you get, you know? And so, as you all, I'm sure, know, Mahakashapa says to Ananda, Ananda? And Ananda says, yes. And he says, put down the flag. You know? In other words, stop all your thinking. Stop trying to analyze. Stop trying to understand. That's all we're being asked to do by these koans. koans are not problems to solve. You can think of them, or I try to think of them more as an invitation to experience what the koan is trying to transmit to us. And so when we hear these stories and when we hear and we work with a koan, if you want to call it work, it's more like, what is that experience? It's not something you can understand. How can I, at best, have this experience? And that's what the koans are offering us clues about, how to experience what the koan is trying to suggest to us. So in this case, as it says in the appreciatory verse, having shed entirely the minutest obstacles. So he's not talking about, a mote in your eye. He's talking about obstacles in our minds. And the biggest obstacle is that we think something different should be, that something other than what is what we are aspiring to. And if we don't get that, we're disappointed or we feel like there's still more to get. So right now, having studied to the full, that's like Ananda had studied to the full, it's the same as before. It's still a cup of coffee. And it's still this life in this moment. And anything else is not only extra, it's a distraction. And that's what we're seeking most of the time, a distraction from the present moment. So how do we stop doing that? Well, just think of shedding. Not that we're rejecting anything, but that we're continuously open to the moment. And that opens the gateway, not for disappointment or bitter whatever. It opens the gateway to appreciation and to gratitude. And it's not as if everything is hunky-dory. It's not as if people aren't dying. It's not as if we're not unhappy about things in our life. It's not as if the war isn't going on or people aren't being shot up in schools. But we are in the moment and able to appreciate even everything that comes our way. Not that we lose any sense of judgment or proportion or right and wrong, which is often the kind of cliched accusation against Zen or Buddhism, that it's a kind of nihilism that, well, when you're really enlightened, nothing matters because you're above it all. You're one with the absolute. I think that's just baloney. That enlightenment, that realization, and being present and aware instead of always looking somewhere else and thinking other, that's not a way of escaping the world. That's a way of being in the world. That's the way of being alive. And most of us, or most of my life, I think that I've been living more with the sense and the awareness of what's wrong with me or with the world, and what I regret and what I would like for to be different. And I think the experience of just being present is it. It's what the teaching is about. I sort of doubted this when that first occurred to me. Like I thought, oh, now I got it, But I was thinking about a couple of stories about Rinzai, who I was, studied for a long time in a more Rinzai leaning teaching, but still Rinzai is important to all of us in whatever sect of Buddhism. But I was familiar with some stories about Rinzai, of course, and most of you are, I'm sure. But the story about Rinzai's enlightenment, I hadn't really thought about it until just the other day. It came back to me, and I found it. And I'm going to read it to you because it's worth hearing in a more articulate form. So when Rinzai came to bid farewell, I think you all know this about Rinzai it looked like he was kind of thick. And for a long time, he didn't go to his master, Obaku. And finally one day, I don't remember the exact details, but I think the senior monk kind of mentioned this to Obaku, their teacher, that it seemed like this Rinzai guy had a lot of promise, but he never came to see the teacher. And what's going on there? And the teacher kind of gave the senior monk license. And so the senior monks insisted to Rinzai he had to go to meet with Obaku, the teacher. And so Rinzai reluctantly goes to the teacher, and he goes 3 times, and each time he's beaten. That's the style. And so finally he figures, I don't know what's going on. Rinzai does, this is hopeless. I'm just not cut out for this, whatever, I'm sure we've all had that feeling. At least I have, I'm pretty sure everybody does. So Rinzai decides, okay, he'll leave. And this is a big deal, to leave the monastery. So when he came to bid farewell to Obaku, Huangbo is the Chinese version, Obaku said, don't go anywhere else but to Daiyu's place on the shore at Gaowan. He will surely explain for you. So he's like saying, well, I couldn't help you, but this guy, he knows how to help you. He knows what you need. And so Rinzai dutifully goes there. And Daiyu, the other master, says, where have you come from? Rinzai says, from Obaku's place. Daiyu said, what did Obaku have to say? Rinzai said, 3 times I asked about the true meaning of the Buddha Dharma, and 3 times I got hit. I don't know if I was at fault or not. Daiyu said, Obaku was so kind. He wore himself out for you, but you still come here asking whether there was a fault or not? At these words, Rinzai was greatly enlightened and said, actually, there's not much to Obaku's Buddha Dharma. And that not much is, that's the way it is. It's not much. It's like in the koan, it's the same as before. So if you think the world's going to turn upside down and you're going to become, some kind of whatever, no, you're the same as before, unfortunately or fortunately, for you and for everybody else. So, and there are different wordings of the story, but basically it's, here's another Rinzai quote that's relevant. And also kind of contrary to the idea of there's something special we have to do. We have to become experts. We have to become great sitters. We have to solve, or whatever you want to call it, master 5,000 koans, and we have to get this color robe or that color robe in order to really have accomplished the way. So here's what Rinzai has to say about that. Quote, the way I see it, there's no call for anything special. Just act ordinary. Put on your clothes, eat your rice, pass the time doing nothing. You who come from here and there, you, all of us, who come from here and there, you all have a mind to do something. You search for Buddha, search for the Dharma, search for emancipation, search for a way to get out of the threefold world. Idiots, trying to get out of the threefold world, where will you go? It's only here. You think there's someplace else. That's your problem. That's our problem. So what? The not knowing is the most intimate. So what are the minute obstacles, as to quote the verse? What are these minutest obstacles that keep us from being okay with not knowing, that keep us from being in the present? Well, they're different from all of us, but they're basically the same, not being present. So if you want to know what is not knowing, it's total intimacy with one's life. It's being present in each moment. Nothing more than that. It's not going to change the moment, but it's going to change you. It's going to change us. And I think that's what the teaching is. And you can wrap it in all sorts of wrappings, and you can express it in different ways, in different media, in different languages. But that's what the point of this practice is, as I understand it. And I think that it's worth looking at what is it, what are these minute obstacles that keep us from being willing to completely be present in not knowing. I think that's the challenge of this practice. That's what Zazen enables us to do, but for some it works, for some it doesn't. For some, if it has to be on the floor, or if it's not on the floor, it's not Zazen, or it's not meditation. We have to find our own ways, and we have to be willing to experiment and explore what may not be so familiar, or what may be unexpected, because we all have experiences that we can recall of being okay with being in the present. I was talking with Ruth today, and we were talking about this subject, and as soon as we were talking about moments that we can remember of having had that experience of everything okay, and if you don't mind, I'll just mention. So I asked Ruth, so when have you had those experiences when you weren't so concerned about how things should be, or what's wrong, or the way things ought to be that haven't worked out, et cetera, et cetera. And also all the discomfort that we experience in our life, all the fears we have, all the pains we have, all the sadness we have. What moments have there been? And we all have them. Ruth mentioned playing music. I can understand that. I think we all can. Even just hearing a beautiful piece of music. I mean, it's the oldest cliche in the book. You lose yourself in the experience. You've lost yourself. And what is that self? That's the one that is so craving to know, craving to be okay. And she mentioned scuba diving. Now that doesn't appeal to me, but I can understand, imagine, or I imagine, it seems so different to be in a completely different environment. And yet every environment is different. If we can appreciate it, every moment is different. And when we're in the moment in that way, in the present, we are intimate with our life. That is the most intimate. And that is not knowing. Those are just different ways of expressing it. That is shedding. Shedding, not in the sense of I'm losing or I'm giving up, but I'm continuously open, continuously, everything is fresh and new. So to come back to the koan, just to finish this off, it's so clear that this discussion of what is the purpose of your pilgrimage, what is the meaning of your pilgrimage, what is the meaning of our study of Zen? That's what it's asking. What are you doing? What are we doing here? What are we trying to do? What are we looking for? And at least at this point, Hogen, who turns out to be not such a novice, is saying, I'm wandering. I'm wandering on pilgrimage. What is the meaning of your pilgrimage? What's your purpose? What's the big plan? I don't know. I don't know. Is he speaking from total ignorance? No, it's not that, the koan of Joshu and his teacher, Nansen. What is the way? Ordinary mind is your way. How will I know when I found it? The way is not about knowing or not knowing. Knowing is an illusion. Knowing is what we're doing all the time. Not knowing, in that sense, is ignorance. That's ignorance. It's not the same kind of not knowing we're talking about here. It's not, the way is not about knowing something or missing something that you should know. That's what he means by not knowing. Ordinary mind is the way. And as you probably remember, Joshu says, well, how will I find it? Because we're still looking, still trying to understand. What do you mean, teacher? What do you mean? And so Nansen says, the more you seek after it, the further away you go from it. So how to be in the present? Well, don't look anywhere else. Don't think it's going to happen next week or the next sitting session or the next koan or the next daisen or whatever. It's right now. And if that seems like not enough, which it may well seem, try it. And that is the gateway to really appreciating your life, to really being in the present and to being intimate with your life, your one life that you have right this moment. Okay, that's all I have to say. Any questions? Yes. How? Speak up a little bit.
I don't believe there is something like not knowing, because not knowing is a kind of knowing.
Well, you could say that, but what is it you don't believe? You don't buy it? Is that what you're saying?
That's the right word, but I just don't understand maybe what is not knowing, because I know that I don't know.
But you don't understand.
Knowing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that you're trying to understand. You say you don't understand. And you've heard Roshi say, my favorite quotation of Genpo Roshi, knowing is the booby prize. Or as he said recently, knowing is the booby trap.
I know.
You know that.
Saying.
Okay, now drop what you know. Shed that. Give up knowing. Give up. And give up trying to know.
But what is knowing? Because when we are speaking about not knowing, we have to know what knowing is.
You're an epistemologist. I'm not going there. You know what I'm going to say. Not knowing. Knowing is the booby prize. You want to know what knowing is? It's the booby prize. It's what you get instead of not knowing. So what is the minute obstacle that you need to shed? That we all need to shed. We need to know. You want to understand. We want to know, well, how, okay, I hear you, but I want to do it my way. I want to know. And that's perfectly natural. But look at what it is that's keeping you from not knowing. Just that need to know. Try dropping that. Try shedding that. In meditation, in walking around the block, in looking out at the stars.
Knowing is a state of mind. Not knowing. True.
Yeah.
What's this big difference? I don't understand.
Well, you won't understand. Maybe. No, not maybe. You just are insisting you will not understand. I completely agree with you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yeah.
You had that experience in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And just curious, like what it's like for you, like how is your
What's different?
Yeah, now that you're 2 weeks removed or 3, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Like what a profound experience. And then, you know, what
Here's
what is it like for you now?
Okay. Okay. Right now, having studied to the full, it's the same as before. I mean, I'm sitting in a chair. I'm looking at you. You don't look different than you would have looked had I not had that experience. So what's different is I love you, you know, I appreciate you. I understand where you're coming from. I know exactly how frustrating it is to be trying to understand. And I would just say, you will. You will. But how is it
I'm not
different for
asking,
me?
I was just curious about you.
Yeah, well, that's what's different, as best I can say. But it is this funny thing. Oh, Obaku's Buddha Dharma is not so special, you know? It's not much. That's what Rinzai said. Rinzai, the tyrant of Zen, you know, who was berating and beating his monks because they didn't understand. You know? No, you idiot. What other world do you think you're going to go to? You know, that's what he's telling us idiots. And it's the same as before, like, but we don't want it to be. And we expect it to be. And if it's not, we think we're not there yet. But where is that there? It's only here. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I just say real quick, because of the weirdness of Zoom, when you ask a question, speak up pretty loud, okay? Because Mark's mic is the one that's picking it.
Oh yeah, this is, yeah, I have to say publicly that you can't imagine how hard Bruce has worked to set up this mess. And Chad and Bruce's friend John, and I'm so grateful, and I know how much work it's taking. So any other observations or anything else? Yeah.
All of these
Why don't you take off your mask so they can hear?
All of these stories, the stories of teachers and students interacting.
Yeah.
It's kind of come up today a few times. And I can't remember if it's you who said it or someone else, that maybe you could do this on your own. Do you think it's even possible to do that on your own, to come to that not knowing? Or do you need to be in a relationship to do
Well, one answer I would say is it's only possible to do it on your own. So what circumstances bring that about? You know, I mean, you do it on your own, of course, but a teacher, I mean, you know, Genpo Roshi, you know, has made that possible for me. So no, I couldn't have done it on my own. I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, I've thought a lot often about what makes it possible, what makes us study, and what makes it possible to have even the smallest insight. And I don't know. I mean, I think we're all different. I mean, Roshi was this kid, you know, who was on a drug trip, and he had this fantastic experience. That was 50 years ago, you know, and he's still, you know, mining that. So he didn't have a teacher. He didn't even know what Zen was. So do you have to be a Zen student? Do you have to be a Zen teacher? Well, of course not. But what makes it possible? I think maybe the question is, you know, what for each of us, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, what is it that makes us want to get into this practice? I mean, most people aren't crazy enough to do this or whatever, you know, hopeful enough or desperate enough. Yeah, I think it varies. I have a sense for you, and for me, it's a kind of desperation. I mean, I felt, and you know, what this is saying, listen carefully. Having studied to the full, I mean, you've all been at this a while, most of you, and most of you have lived very full lives. You've had your full life, you know. Now the moment arrives when you can be clearer, that's all, because it's so frustrating. It's so disappointing. It's so, I mean, my feeling was, and that Roshi kind of revved up for me, was, what the fuck have I been doing? You know, what's all this been for? Why am I living with all these regrets and all these wishes and all these disappointments and all these could have beens and should have beens? But to feel that, so, you know, you could say, well, the teacher helped me to that point, but that's what my life led me to, and my life led me to him, just as yours did. So there's no simple answer, but that means there are many possibilities. And I guess we each find our own way. And whatever it is, it's the way. It is the way. I mean, that's why I love that saying of Maizumi Roshi's. Don't expect to be somebody else. Have good trust in yourself. Not the self that you think you should be, but the self that you are. I mean, that's just come back over and over again to me. And it's also for me, and I think for anybody, it's another way of shedding. It's another way of letting go. Let go of what you think you should be. Be who you are. Be in the moment. Be present. Be intimate with your life. Whatever it looks like, whatever it feels like, whatever suffering you're. It's not gonna change in the way that, the same is not gonna be the same anymore. No, shit is shit. Pain is pain. Death is death. Suffering is suffering. And that's not gonna change. I mean, I guess if I look back, I recognize I got into this because I didn't want it to be that way. And we all do in one way or another, And it seems like really swallowing that seemingly bitter pill is the only way out. You can't go around it. You have to go through it. Well, that's the good news. Well, thank you very much.